From the Spec Network, this is Fragmented, an Android developer podcast where we talk about building good software and becoming better Android developers. I'm Donn Felker.
And I'm Kaushik Gopal.
Welcome to the show.
This episode of Fragmented is brought to you by American Express, and I'm here to let you know that their Android team is hiring. If you love the idea of working in a team which values testability, customer experience, and proper Android UI design guideline support, all while getting things done right the first time, well then, my friend, keep listening. The Android team at American Express prides themselves on shipping a high-quality experience to end users, all while implementing the latest and greatest technologies at hand. For example, what about Kotlin? Yeah, they've been using it for 2+ years. It's what we write in every single day. Design patterns? Yeah, they got you covered from UI patterns to typical Gang of 4 patterns. They've seen it all and they know when to use the right tool for the right job. Well, what about testing? Like integration, functional, and unit testing, you might be wondering. Ha, you're in luck. Again, they have a huge test suite that is run on every single PR to ensure that no regressions are hit. Now, those are going to be functional, integration, and unit tests, and so forth. And get this, you're given the time to write the test to ensure your changes don't break anything and ensure your changes work. Yes, you're given the time to write your test. Now, let me go off script here. How many companies are happy that you spend extra time writing tests? Well, probably very few. I can't count many on one hand that have been happy with me spending more time writing tests. They probably wanted to, or you probably wanted to, but you just needed to ship the code faster. Well, American Express, they know that getting things done right the first time matters, and testing is paramount, which means that quality is paramount. Now, maybe that sounds a bit scary because you've not written a ton of tests. Well, you're in luck then, because the team at American Express is full of fantastic folks that will help mold you into becoming the best version of your current self when it comes to developing professional Android apps. And here's another great thing about American Express. They support you for being part of the community. Now, for example, do you want to speak at conferences? Totally, they support you. You want to build your writing skills on the tech blog at americanexpress.io? Go for it. Again, they support you. What about contributing to open source? Again, they support you. Start writing that open source. If you want to be part of the community in any way, from speaking to coding to running a user group, etc., you guessed it, they'll support you. And finally, they get the whole work-life balance thing. It's not a myth. The benefits are great, and you're not required to work 80-hour weeks. And well, to tell you the truth, that just makes life a lot easier. How can I say this with so much confidence? To tell you the truth, I've been working with American Express for over 2 years now, and I've seen this all firsthand. So if you're interested in coming to work alongside of me, follow the link in the show notes and be sure to tell them that I sent you. I hope to see you around.
So what many folks don't realize is that when Donn and I hop on a call to do a recording for the episode, we usually talk about a whole bunch of random things. Owing to time constraints, these don't always make the show. But we thought sometimes folks might just be interested in these snippets, and it would be nice to just release these as mini fragments. So this is one of those. In this mini fragment, I talked to Donn about a recent side project that I did with Kotlin scripting. We go into Kotlin scripting using kscript specifically, pros, the cons, setting it up, and more. We've added links to some interesting resources about Kotlin scripting, so you want to make sure you also check the show notes for this one. So you too can explore Kotlin scripting and, see if it's a fit for you. Enjoy the show. Taking this on a different note, I want to talk to you about something that I did some time back. So at Instacart recently, we had our annual hackathon, and I was helping organize the hackathon this time. And it was interesting because, it's sort of like this, it was this 3-day event. And because I was helping organize it, in the end, basically, there came a point where we needed to get everyone to vote on their favorite project and then find out the winners. And what I noticed is there isn't actually any service or free, easy way to do one-time polls outside. Because there are some incredibly good services. I think Poll Daddy and what's the other one? Survey Monkey, or there are these services that do an amazing job with customizing in all kinds of crazy ways. How you can put up a poll where you can vote for projects, right? Just if you're conducting a tournament or anything and you just want to quickly be able to spin something up so that you can get people to vote and tabulate the results. There isn't an easy solution out there. These are easy solutions. The problem is typically for this hackathon, I wanted 400 people to be able to vote,
Yeah.
And all I wanted for is like a one-time event. Like this is just one event for one day, get it done. And then I don't like many of them have like subscription mechanisms, and they have like other kinds of mechanisms that I felt was a little more expensive. And also I wanted an excuse to also work on at least something for the hackathon, even though it's organized, like I want to do something. So what I did is Google Forms, we know, is free, right?
Yep.
So what I did is I kind of came up with a mechanism of using Google Forms to tabulate these results. And the reason I'm actually talking about it on this podcast is because I'm not sure for folks who have worked with Google Forms, like it'll dump it very easily into a sheet, but it is the way it dumps it into a sheet is kind of like horrendous. And by the time this podcast comes out, hopefully I'll have like a blog post out where I can show you some of how like some of the results and how they look. It's like this weird mechanism, but it was also the time that I think Kotlin 1.2.5 or 1.2.4 was out, and they talked about the improvement in Kotlin scripting. So what I wrote is essentially from Google Forms, I would dump the CSV file, and I wrote a Kotlin script, like, as like a bash, like how people would traditionally think about bash scripts. I wrote a Kotlin script to process this CSV file and dump the results. And it worked out amazingly well because, to be clear, the other person who was like with me organizing the hackathon, so it was two of us who organized this hackathon, he was like, I don't want to take any risk. Like, how about we just do something very simple? I was like, no, I got this. He was petrified because, I mean, this is like the final event, right? Like, so if you somehow screw up the way like the results are like tabulated, or like it doesn't work in a way that you expect, like that can be a pretty big shit show, right? So, but it worked out amazingly well, and I'll make sure to share a link like to the blog post and also the script. But like it was a lot of fun. Like, I could write a Kotlin script and it was all Kotlin. I could process the CSV file. It was interesting because I also added weights. For example, typically like when you have voting mechanisms, like if you have the first place, you vote for the first place, second place, and third place, you want to also like add weights to it to sort of like make sure you get an easier result, because if someone gets 2 third places, but like one project gets a first place, you want to add that weight to sort of make it easier to like dictate, like, a first place is way more valuable than a third place, position. So you can add weights and like, I can throw in, I think it's already on GitHub, but I can like send that script and, it was fun for me. It was my way of like doing something for the hackathon. So have you ever worked with Kotlin scripting before?
No, I haven't really touched it. Now it's kind of my question is like, what did you find to be two-part here? What was the most difficult thing about it, and what did you love about it?
Good question. So what I loved about it was obviously Kotlin's such a beautiful language, and because I deal with Kotlin, having that one language, it's like the thing that we've talked about, right? Like sometimes, and JavaScript, like we fear that JavaScript might be that language, but sometimes just having a single language, especially if that language is nice to work with, and using it for real world use cases is so much fun, right? Like this was a real problem that I had, and just solving it with Kotlin was so nice. And Kotlin is such a beautiful language, right? So that was the good parts. The not so great part is, even though you have Kotlin scripting, it doesn't work as easily as, like running a Ruby script or like a Bash script. Because again, the thing is with Kotlin, it is like it runs on the JVM, right? Yeah. So you have to compile it down. It is compiled down to a class file, and that class file is eventually what is run, right? So like the whole integration with, like, there's this thing called kscript, and again, I'll add like links to that. And if I point to my repository, I also talk about how you can run one of these things. But the way it works is you point to a kscript, which almost is sort of like this semi-bash script kind of thing, and that's where the integration is improved. But even so, it isn't as simple as just like I have .kotlin run as a script and boom, you have it, right? It isn't as simple as that. Also, the other things like getting dependencies, for example, if I want to use like a lot of these helper utilities that I'm very familiar with, then you have to have like this Maven installation locally, because, it isn't as simple. And like kscript and a lot of these sort of helper utilities try to make that process easy. But then you need like a local Maven repository where like you pull the libraries. It's not too hard, but like, knowing that happens kind of like, makes me feel a little unhappy because it's not as simple as just have like, oh, include this Gradle script as well and we'll just do everything,
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer.
There isn't like the equivalent yet of like a gem file or something, because with Ruby, that's the way it works, right?
Yeah.
And I guess like Maven is that equivalent, but
Yeah.
for those who have worked with Maven, they know it's like nowhere close to like the whole bundler system. Like Ruby's like gem bundler system is amazing. That is not something that we have. So like, in between I was trying to get fancy where I was like, oh, maybe I can use RX with this thing. Because like, I can stream the file and then if the, like, the results get fast enough, I can just like process this parallelly. But at that point I was just like, I was kidding myself. So I didn't have to do any of that. But I was curious because I wanted to push the extent. I want to see how I could push this, because in an ideal world, like all my scripts, because I have a whole bunch of Ruby Bash scripts in my tooling system, like now in my machine that I have cron jobs that run. And this is like a vestige of like having used a computer for a very long time. I have like these scripts that like take care of certain things for me. I would love to have them all moved over to Kotlin, because Kotlin is so much more easier to maintain, right? And that's the language that's my language of choice right now.
So what are they all written in right now? Like just Bash or something like that?
Yeah, a lot of them are Bash. I have some in Bash. I have many of them in Ruby actually, because at one point, and I've told the story before, I was like basically a Ruby on Rails developer, right? Like that was like my profession. That was what I was hired for. So I'm still pretty familiar with Ruby, and I do like Ruby as a language. So a lot of those scripts are in Ruby. In fact, like a lot of my helper Git scripts, like a lot of the release scripts that I write for like, for like even Instacart at this point, a lot of them are still in Ruby because like I'm just so familiar with them. But I think I want to start moving a lot of those to Kotlin now.
Let me be devil's advocate here and ask you, what benefit do you get by moving them to Kotlin?
Oh, absolutely nothing. Just a personal sense of joy.
Okay, all right. That matters though.
Kotlin is also easy to maintain because again, like if you're working with Android developers and you have a lot of scripts that you run, for example, we have a release script right now that actually is like in pure Ruby. I love this script because, and I think maybe we've talked about this before.
Yeah, you've shared it before, I think, or a version of it.
Yeah, so the idea is essentially we just type release, and depending on which branch you're in, it just does the right thing, right? Like it runs a clean build, builds an APK, uploads it to our like release folder, like or like the Play Store. You have it like stored there. Like version incrementing is automatic. So I have never at this point ever had to manually go and change my version number because the release script just handles it, right? And there's like a semantic versioning system that it understands. For example, if it knows that it needs to release a patch, then it increases just the patch number. If it knows that you're branching off master, then it's probably like a new feature, which then means the minor needs to be incremented, right? So it just does so many of those things like automatically. So ideally what all of our engineers at Instacart do is they just type release and it does the right thing. Like literally you type release, you run that script and it just does everything. All of that is in Ruby, right? I would like to move it to Kotlin just because Kotlin's a nicer language. But again, yeah, it's such a stable thing that I don't think I would like. To answer your question, there's probably not any real benefit from me moving to Kotlin, but new scripts that I write, I would like to move to using this.
Let me ask you this though too. If let's say you did rewrite that in Kotlin and it was good and everything, you like it and people can read it that are Android developers, which makes sense. And you wanted to share that with a new teammate that just joined on a new computer and maybe they've got Android already set up. What does that look like? Let's say you give them that script. What do they need to do at that point in time to run that script? Because I haven't really worked with Kotlin script at all. So I'm really kind of wondering what that setup looks like.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like I can actually, let me pull up my GitHub thing. So I'm making sure I'm not forgetting the steps. Because that was initially pretty tricky. Because I have looked at like the Kotlin scripts some time back. But then the thing is, it was a little trickier then, like getting it set up. And I forgot how to do it before. So I actually noted it down in the README. So the way it works is if this was a new developer and they want to start running Kotlin scripts, at least if they use a mechanism that I'm using, the first thing is like Homebrew. For those who don't know, Homebrew is like this super helpful utility that you can run that'll install like all kinds of different software. So using Homebrew, you have to install Maven. So the command is brew install Maven. You need Maven for this. So that's like one dependency. Once you run that, you have there's this thing called kscript, right? Now there are two ways to run Kotlin scripts, and these are almost sort of like competing libraries. One is just straight up using the Kotlin compiler, Kotlin C is what it's called. The other is this helper utility called kscript that like I don't remember who it was, but I can like put a link. Kscript is almost like a library that runs Kotlin script files easily. It takes care of a lot of the boilerplate. So I would recommend that. And the way all you have to do then is then run again another homebrew installation. So you say brew install kscript, and literally what you do is you run the command kscript and point to your script file. Now, for those who don't know, Kotlin scripts aren't .kotlin files. They're this thing called a .kts, and I think they're standardizing that format. So if you open up the code, it's pretty much like straight up Kotlin. Let me do one thing.
Do you need like a main function to start these scripts, or how do they get invoked?
So you don't need a main. Because it's a scripting language, with most scripting languages, it just executes from top to bottom, right?
Yeah, I wasn't sure how it would work in Kotlin. I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, it's very similar in this way where you don't necessarily need something, but the way I've sort of structured it is I have like my program, I write that in a function on the top, so that talks about the functionality, and right at the very end, I just basically have like I execute this sort of program. So I'm going to paste that file, and I can make sure I put it in the show notes for folks who are interested. So literally, like, it's because the advantage of scripting languages is like from top to bottom, right? So essentially it would just, I have a function that I declare on the top. It doesn't get run, obviously, because the function needs to be called. And at the bottom, I basically call that function and then gets executed. So.
Oh, okay. All right. So you have to install those couple of things, and then are you ready to go, or do you have to worry about Maven installations locally, or no?
You don't. I mean, if you don't care about it, I don't care about it. So like, because I barely use like Maven, like, unless you have like some complicated Maven setup. This essentially, you just run brew install Maven, and that sets the Maven repository up. Then kscript knows when, like, if you want to pull dependencies and stuff, kscript basically knows where to point to. So if I have like this other script, like for example, this hackathon script that I wrote, I think I do pull a library for like the CSV parsing. And if you see like on the second line, basically, the second line is the kscript thing, but somewhere here, like I call a CSV parsing sort of utility, and you can pull in dependencies that way. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Interesting. Yeah, I think that's part of I think folks that like Kotlin will use it and go down and try this path. But I also think this is one of the reasons why other scripting languages like Ruby or JavaScript or whatever that have built-in package managers such as bundler, gems and npm or yarn or whatever. I think that's one of the reasons why people just default to that. It's just it's so fast for them to just get up and running, and they don't have to install all these things, which,
to be fair, this is also pretty simple because, like, the setup is like if you don't necessarily care about customizing your Maven setup, like you just have to run brew install Maven, and it's like a single line it's almost like our Gradle file. You insert the dependency right at the top of the script.
Yeah.
And when you run the script, the first time when it compiles, it'll just pull the dependencies one time. And after that, it's just cached. So then it just executes.
Yeah, not bad. Yeah, no.
It's just that, Maven, I think like there's also like, I'm slightly jaded from my past using Maven and all those ant XML files and all those, anything around that like sort of like scares me. So, which is why when I was like, oh, Maven, but it's actually, I mean, if I'm being fair, like you barely, like the setup is like 3 lines, you just paste those 3 lines and then you can start running this script. So
do you think something like Kotlin script will take off, or do you think it's just going to kind of be for side usage? What's your opinion?
Unless they solve that problem where it's easy enough to like pull dependencies and it's literally just like a straight up running thing, I think it'll take off. Like again, like there's very little awareness around this, which is also the other thing. JetBrains, I think, only very recently sort of like pushed for that, because the intention was not for Kotlin to necessarily be a scripting language. But I think like it's such a beautiful language that I think people would like that. My gut is like, it's hard to say, but like, in the next 6 months to a year, I don't see it being like a huge thing unless like, everyone starts popularizing it, right? Like, so, because otherwise, like, it's funny. I haven't seen like too many people use Kotlin script or like their use cases, right? Which is also why one of the reasons I want to write this blog post, because it's so easy to run it, right? And if you look at the code, like if the code is not too bad, given that it's like Kotlin. It's like, and I've tried to like be very good about documenting what each thing does. So you can like very easily go through the code, and like if you have knowledge of Kotlin, you can see how we basically process this.
No, I'm looking at the code here. I'm reading it. It's nothing too complicated. And it's funny. It's one of the things I wanted to talk about. We probably don't have time today, but maybe another time, is just learning by reading other people's code. Like, I think that's one of the best things you can do, is go find an open source project or something you're interested in, Kotlin script, whatever here, read someone else's code. You're going to find something that you didn't know existed. They're like, oh, I didn't know I could do that, or I didn't know that method existed on that class in Kotlin or whatever.
Yeah, that's one of the beauties with open source, right? Like just seeing how like different people, and like even like with PR review systems, I find that so many times with like the engineers that I work with, right? Sometimes they'll write something in Kotlin, I was like, wow, I did not know you could do that,
Yeah. I'm constantly surprised with Kotlin.
Yeah. Since we're on the topic, like there's one quick thing I wanted, like this is one thing I recently did not realize, but one of our engineers used this. So you know how with Android, typically you override a method like on start, and then you say super.onStart. You run that as the first thing, and then below that you have the rest of the stuff that you want to proceed with. One of our engineers basically wrote this thing. He's like super.onStart, and I think it was apply also, and then you write the rest of the function in a block. And I was like, oh, that's a pretty slick way to do it, like, because that way you're forcing it to be the first thing that runs. But also it sort of like encapsulates it, right? So just a lot of these small touches that like I never necessarily thought of using Kotlin that way, but it's nice to know, like, good way of like learning new things is looking at other people's code. So 100% agree with you there.
Yeah, it's just amazing what JetBrains has been able to do by building this language, and some of the things they're able to accomplish. Because if you think about it, it all has to just boil down to the JVM, which we've had for a long time. So it's just got to work. and there's a lot of black magic that's going on underneath the scenes, and it works. And that's just absolutely amazing. So it makes developing a whole lot easier and funner.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All right, Donn, I think it's time to wind this episode down.
Totally.
If folks want to reach out to you, what's a good way to do it?
The best way to reach out to me is going to be on Twitter, and that's at Donn Felker, or you can hit me up on Instagram at the same handle, Donn Felker. What about you?
I am Kaushik Gopal on Twitter and the same handle on Instagram. So yeah, folks should feel free to follow us there. And yeah, you can hear a lot about the other stuff that we're doing. Thank you all for listening. We will catch you in the next episode.
Once again, we'd like to thank American Express for sponsoring today's episode. If you're interested in joining one of the best Android teams out there, please follow the link in the show notes and go ahead and tell them that I sent you. Looking forward to hearing from you soon.
That's it for the show, folks. Fragmented is hosted by Donn Felker and me, Kaushik Gopal. We edit and produce all the episodes here on Fragmented. Sarah the Amazing Jackson from the Spec Network helps with production assistance and wraps our final mix. Our theme and ad music is by the national recording artist Blueprint from Weightless Recordings. You can find more Fragmented episodes at fragmentedpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode.